From the outside, we were the perfect family, living a life of quiet luxury in a manicured Dallas suburb. All thanks to my father, a financial wizard, a pillar of the community, a man who could do no wrong. But behind closed doors, I was the family's designated failure, the target of a quiet, soul-crushing campaign of psychological warfare designed to break me. He taught me about money, success, and family, but every lesson was a lie. After he set me up to take the fall for a crime I didn't commit and cast me out, I thought I'd lost everything. What I didn't know was that in the ruins of my old life, I would stumble upon the one secret he never wanted me to find, the terrifying truth behind his entire empire. What happens when the son they broke becomes the only one who can expose the truth? To understand the full, devastating scale of the revenge he never saw coming, you have to hear the whole story. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch! The first time my father taught me about money, he taught me how to lie. Not with words, but with appearances. Our house, a sprawling 2-story brick testament to new money in a suburb just north of Dallas, was the first lie. It was immaculate, sterile, a show home where no one actually lived. The lawn was a perfect chemically green carpet. The cars in the driveway were always washed. My mother, Sarah, was the curator of this museum of success, a woman whose beauty had become a kind of brittle armor over the years. And my father, Richard, was its god king. To the world, Richard was a self-made financial genius. He ran a boutique wealth management firm, handling the fortunes of old Texas oil families and tech entrepreneurs. He was charismatic, his voice a smooth baritone that could sell ice in a blizzard. He'd clap you on the back, remember your kids' names, and make you feel like the most important person in the room. But that was the performance. At home, the spotlight was always on him, and if you weren't reflecting his glory back at him, you were in the dark. For me, it was always dark. My childhood was a long, slow masterclass in walking on eggshells. Every family dinner was a press conference where my father was the star and I was the bumbling intern about to get fired. If I got a 98 on a test, his first question wasn't "great job," it was, "What happened to the other 2 points?" If I expressed an interest in art or literature, he'd sigh with theatrical disappointment. "Leo," he'd say, swirling the wine in his glass, "the world doesn't pay for pretty pictures. It pays for results, tangible assets." He had this way of making me feel like my very existence was a liability on his personal balance sheet. He never yelled. Yelling was messy, unsophisticated. His weapon was a quiet, corrosive disappointment, a steady drip of psychological acid that wore you down until you started to believe him. "You're too sensitive, Leo. That's not how it happened. You're misremembering. I'm not being hard on you. I'm trying to build character. It's a shame you can't see that." It was classic gaslighting, but I didn't have a name for it back then. It was just the air I breathed. My mother was his silent partner. She saw it all. I know she did. I'd catch her watching us, a flicker of something, pity, fear, in her eyes before she'd quickly look away and start clearing the plates. Her job was to maintain the peace, which meant maintaining my father's mood. If I was upset, it was my responsibility to fix it so that it wouldn't upset him. It was a strange, twisted form of codependency where I was the unwilling third wheel. I learned that my feelings were an inconvenience. I learned to be quiet. I learned helplessness. The breaking point, the moment the quiet war turned into a full-blown execution, came during my senior year of high school. I'd been accepted into a prestigious business program at UT Austin, one of the few things I'd done that earned a nod of actual approval from my father. As a test, he decided to let me manage a small portfolio. It was a trust account set up for me years ago by my grandfather, worth about $50,000. "Let's see what you can do with it, Leo," he'd said, a predatory gleam in his eye. "The real world doesn't have a safety net." I took it seriously. I spent weeks researching, making conservative, smart trades. I was proud. The portfolio was up nearly 8% in 6 months. I was finally proving him wrong. I was competent. I was worthy. One evening, he called me into his home office. The room smelled of leather and accomplishment. He gestured to his computer screen, his face a mask of cold fury. "Explain this," he said. On the screen was my portfolio, but it was a bloodbath. A huge portion of the money had been moved into a single high-risk penny stock that had cratered, losing nearly $40,000 in a single day. My heart stopped. I didn't do that, I stammered, my blood turning to ice. I would never make a trade like that. Someone must have hacked the account. My father leaned back in his leather chair, the picture of disappointment. He didn't even have the decency to look angry. He looked tired. Tired of my failures. Leo, he sighed, shaking his head slowly. The first rule of finance is accountability. Don't blame hackers. Don't make excuses. You got greedy. You got emotional. You gambled and you lost. I tried to warn you. No, Dad, I swear to you I didn't do it. My voice was cracking, desperation clawing at my throat. I felt like I was going insane. I knew I hadn't made that trade. I knew it. He just held up a hand. It's done. The money's gone. But the lesson is more valuable, wouldn't you agree? He swiveled in his chair, turning his back to me. I've already called the university. I told them there's been a change of plans. I can't, in good conscience, send a son who is this reckless with money into a business program under my name. It would reflect poorly on me. There wouldn't respond. He hadn't just watched me burn. He had fanned the flames and then called the fire department to report me for arson. You did this, I whispered, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. And Dante made the trade. He didn't turn around. You're being hysterical. You need to learn to own your mistakes. That's what men do. I looked to the doorway, and my mother was standing there. Her face was pale, her hands twisting the fabric of her silk blouse. Our eyes met, and in that moment I begged her, pleaded with her silently, to say something. To defend me. To acknowledge the truth she had to have known. She took a small step into the room, her eyes darting from me to the back of my father's head. Richard, she began, her voice barely a whisper, maybe he's just... Don't, my father said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous octave without turning around. Don't undermine the lesson, Sarah. And just like that, she deflated. The fight went out of her. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a terrible, soul-crushing apology, and then she looked down at the floor. The cognitive dissonance was complete. She would rather believe I was a reckless failure than confront the monster she was married to. She chose the lie. That night, I packed a bag. I had a few $100s saved from a summer job he'd called a distraction. As I was walking out the door, my mother stopped me in the foyer. The house was silent. Leo, please, she whispered, tears finally streaming down her face. Don't go. He's just trying to make you stronger. He loves you. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, the woman who had just stood by and watched my future get torched. And for the first time, I felt nothing but a cold, empty space where my love for her used to be. No, Mom, I said, my voice eerily calm. He doesn't love me. He loves the idea of me he can control. And you love him more than you love me. I walked out of that perfect lying house and didn't look back. I was 18 years old, disowned, framed, with my college dreams in ashes. I had no money, no plan, and a wound in my soul so deep I was sure it would never heal. He hadn't just taken my money or my future, he had taken my identity. And as I drove away into the humid Texas night, I felt the full weight of the helplessness he had so carefully cultivated in me. I was nothing. He had won. The years that followed were a blur of cheap apartments, instant ramen, and the kind of grinding, soul-numbing work that pays the bills and nothing more. I was a ghost haunting the fringes of the world my father dominated. While my old classmates were getting internships at Merrill Lynch, I was working in the back office of a small, independent auditing firm in a less glamorous part of Dallas. It wasn't a choice. It was the only job I could get with a tarnished high school record and no college degree. My official title was Junior Compliance Associate. It was a glorified term for a paper pusher. I spent my days in a gray cubicle, staring at spreadsheets and cross-referencing trade logs, looking for discrepancies. It was tedious, meticulous work, but something strange happened in that sea of numbers. I found a weird sense of peace in it. Here, the numbers didn't lie. They couldn't be gaslit. An error was an error. A fact was a fact. For the first time in my life, I was in a world that made sense. A world with rules that my father couldn't bend to his will. Without realizing it, I was getting an education more valuable than any business degree. I was learning the guts of the financial system, not the glamorous facade my father presented, but the messy, complex plumbing behind the walls. I learned how money really moved, how trades were settled, how loopholes were exploited, and how the cleverest criminals hid their tracks. I became fluent in the language of fraud. I didn't speak to my family. After a few initial, half-hearted calls from my mother, which were really just thinly veiled attempts to get me to apologize to my father, the line went silent. I was a non-person, an asset that had been written off. The pain of that abandonment eventually hardened into a kind of detached resolve. I wasn't living for them anymore. I was living for me. I started taking night classes, slowly working my way toward a certification in forensic accounting. I was building myself back up, one brick at a time, in the shadow of the empire that had cast me out. The discovery, when it came, wasn't a dramatic bolt of lightning. It was a flicker on a screen, a single-line item in a massive data file. My firm had been contracted to do a routine audit for a larger bank, and we were reviewing transaction histories from dozens of smaller third-party wealth management firms that used their platform. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was tired, caffeinated, and just wanted to go home. And then I saw the name, Ashworth Financial Group. My father's firm. My breath caught in my chest. A cold sweat trickled the back of my neck. It was just a coincidence. They were one of dozens on the list. But I couldn't look away. My boss, a perpetually stressed man named Dave, would have my head if he knew I was even looking at this. It was a massive conflict of interest. But I couldn't stop myself. That night, I stayed late, long after everyone else had gone home. With trembling hands, I started to dig. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Revenge? Vindication? I just needed to know. I pulled the raw transaction logs for Ashworth Financial, a mountain of data that would be meaningless to most people. But to me, it was a language I now understood perfectly. At first, everything looked clean, polished, just like my father. But I knew his tells. I knew his obsession with appearances. The crime wouldn't be obvious. It would be hidden in the margins, in the rounding errors, in the perfectly legal but ethically bankrupt gray areas. And then I found it, a pattern. My father had a number of elderly clients, people whose families had been with him for decades. Their portfolios were managed through complex trusts. What I saw was a series of small, almost unnoticeable management fees and administrative charges being debited from these accounts every month. They were small amounts. A few hundred here, 1,000 there, barely enough to be noticed in multi-million-dollar portfolios. But when I aggregated them, the numbers were staggering. He was skimming, siphoning millions of dollars over the course of a decade. But that was just the appetizer. The main course was far more sinister. I found a series of transactions where he was using the liquid assets from these trust funds as collateral for his own, highly leveraged personal investments. He was gambling with his clients' money, using their secure funds to back his risky plays. If the plays paid off, he pocketed the gains. If they failed, well, the trust would absorb the loss, and he could bury it in a complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts. It was a sophisticated, brilliantly constructed Ponzi scheme, one where the only person guaranteed to win was him. I felt sick. This wasn't just greed. This was a violation of the deepest trust, perpetrated against the most vulnerable. These were people who saw him as a friend, as family. He was a parasite dressed in a Savile Row suit. I sat back in my squeaky office chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the stark reality. I held his entire world in my hands. On a USB drive tucked into my pocket was enough evidence to send him to prison for the rest of his life. To strip his name from every charity plaque and country club roster in Dallas. I had the power to utterly destroy him. But the question was, could I do it? This wasn't some abstract enemy. This was my father. And destroying him meant destroying my mother's life too. She would lose everything. The house, the status, the security she had traded her soul for. Was justice for him worth the ruin of her? For a week, I was paralyzed. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. The weight of that USB drive in my pocket felt like a block of lead. The scared, broken boy inside me was screaming, "Don't do it. Just walk away. You're finally free. Don't go back into the storm." But the man I had become, the man forged in the quiet integrity of numbers and rules, knew there was only one right answer. I decided to give my mother one last chance. A final life raft, I called her. She was surprised to hear from me, her voice a mix of caution and a flicker of hope. I asked to meet her for coffee, somewhere neutral. We sat in a sterile coffee shop, the air thick with 5 years of unspoken words. She looked older, the lines around her eyes deeper. She told me about her charity work, about a recent trip to Europe. She didn't ask me a single question about my life. It was as if the last 5 years had been a brief, unpleasant gap in her programming that she was trying to ignore. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I leaned forward and lowered my voice. "Mom," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I know about the money. I know what he's been doing with his clients' accounts." Her mask didn't just crack, it shattered. For a split second, I saw pure, unadulterated terror in her eyes. But it was immediately replaced by something else, a weary, defeated resignation. She took a slow sip of her latte, her hand trembling slightly. She didn't deny it. She didn't act surprised. "I told him it was too risky," she whispered, looking into her cup as if it held the answers to the universe. "I told him years ago that he was flying too close to the sun, but he wouldn't listen. He never listens." The blood drained from my face. The final, horrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't a secret she was learning from me. "I knew," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "You knew all along." "I didn't know the details," she said defensively, her eyes finally meeting mine. They were pleading. I knew things weren't always what they seemed. I knew the lifestyle we had. It required a certain creativity. What was I supposed to do, Leo? Walk away? Give all this up? For what? Some abstract moral principle. There it was. The truth, uglier and more painful than any lie she had ever told. She hadn't been a victim of his deception. She had been a willing, silent accomplice. She chose the money. She chose the house. She chose the lie, over and over again. She had watched him frame me, destroy my future, and cast me out, all while knowing that he was the real criminal. My entire childhood, my entire sense of betrayal, was reframed in that single horrifying admission. It wasn't just that he was a monster, it was that she had helped him build the cage. That was the moment the trauma bond finally snapped. The last shred of lingering obligation, of childish hope that she might one day choose me, evaporated. I felt a strange chilling calm settle over me. I stood up from the table. "Thank you, Mom," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "You've made this a lot easier." She looked up at me, confused. "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer. I just walked out of the coffee shop and left her there with her cooling latte and the bill. My revenge wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a tearful confrontation or a splashy exposé in the Dallas Morning News. That would have been my father's style, all ego and spectacle. I chose a different path. My path, quiet, meticulous, undeniable. The next morning, I compiled everything into a neat, organized, and utterly damning file. The transaction logs, the offshore account numbers, a detailed step-by-step analysis of the fraud, written in the dry, precise language of a forensic accountant. I packaged it all up. One copy went to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Another went to the FBI's white-collar crime division. I sent them anonymously, through a secure, encrypted service. My name was nowhere on it. My fingerprints were gone. Then I wiped the USB drive, deleted the files from my work computer, and walked out of the office for the last time. The next day I gave my notice. It took 3 months. I was working at a new, better firm across town when the news broke. It was a small headline at first, then it exploded. Dallas financial guru Richard Ashworth arrested in massive fraud investigation. The stories detailed a multi-million-dollar scheme targeting elderly clients. His face was plastered everywhere, no longer the charismatic genius, but a common thief. His assets were frozen. The firm was dismantled. The perfect sterile house in the suburbs had a "For Sale by Us Marshal Service" sign hammered into its perfect green lawn. I saw a picture of my mother online, leaving the federal courthouse. She looked broken, a ghost in last season's designer clothes. She was a victim now, she told the reporters. She had been duped, just like everyone else. I almost laughed. I never heard from either of them again. Sometimes I wonder if my father knows, if, sitting in his cell, he ever pieces it together. That the weapon that brought him down wasn't a rival or a regulator, but the sensitive, useless son he had written off as a bad investment. The son who learned the lesson he never intended to teach, that the truth, unlike money, has a value you can't fake. And its returns are absolute. I live in a small, comfortable apartment in a quieter part of the city now. It's not a mansion, but it's mine. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelf, was bought and paid for with honest work. I'm a senior forensic accountant now, and I'm good at what I do. I find the lies hidden in the numbers. I don't feel joy at what happened. There's no triumphant celebration. There's just a quiet, a peace. The kind of peace that comes from closing a ledger, from balancing an account that has been in the red for far too long. He taught me that wealth was about tangible assets. He was wrong. True wealth is the freedom to be who you are. It's the knowledge that your foundation is built on solid ground, not on the shifting sands of a beautiful, terrible lie. And that is an inheritance no one can ever take away from me.